Welcome to Martial Road, a journey through forgotten techniques, forbidden moves, and the untold power of martial arts. Talk about bite, cold ruthlessness, and bone-snapping attacks. Karate appears at the top of the pile. These aren't some juvenile tactics. They end contests in seconds, with moves like the disorienting eye gougers, groin strikes, and the crippling knife hands. However, these life-snuffing strikes have been banned by the MMA. Could one strike from these techniques really decide life or death? Is there an outside chance of them making a comeback to the octagon? Join us as we unveil 10 deadly karate techniques banned by MMA. Number 10. Shuto uchi, knife hand strike. The International Mixed Martial Arts Federation, or IMMAF, has categorically ruled against karate techniques that could endanger an opponent, one of which is the Shuto uchi. The Shuto uchi requires the attacker to wield their hand like a bladed weapon, sending the edge of their hand vertically to the opponent's carotid artery or throat, which would ripple into the collapse of a windpipe and a shortage of breath. For perfection, the move is practiced on heavily padded mats to break the fall of the opponent after they are impacted by a hit to the throat. The move is rather simple, as it only requires precision and enough cunning from the attacker to create separation between themselves and their opponent, forcing a vulnerability before launching the side of their hand on the opponent's neck, directly attacking their blood vessels, which could disorient the attacker, knock them unconscious, or simply kill them. Number 9. Geri, the fatal kick to the groin. The geri is a popular keriwaza or kicking technique in Japanese martial arts that threatens the groin area. The technique is simple, as it requires a lot of focus, agility, and precision from the attacker, otherwise they could be easily countered. Given that most people during a fight, professionals or not, instinctively protect their groin area, the geri has to be performed only when the opponent is caught off guard or has been tricked into a wider stance by the attacker, who then raises their back leg with toes pointed down and the knee bent before flicking the leg out and connecting to the target area, sending pangs of pain into the opponent's body and possibly forcing a surrender and a bonus trip to the hospital. A perfect example is the 2022 fight between Mike Jackson and Dean Barry on the UFC, where Dean was disqualified following a spinning kick to Mike's groin, which left the latter yelling in pain. Number 8. Nukite tsuki, the deadly spear hand thrust. The Nukite tsuki is a popular karate move that is found in all types of dojos. It's simple, like most karate moves, yet absolutely deadly. It's a weapon of mass destruction that sends shockwaves immediately down the opponent's spine. While karate does not encourage the use of weapons, whether ranged like a gun or a shuriken, or a melee weapon like a cudgel or a combat knife, it enforces the importance of assuming dangerous fist shapes aimed at points of contact that ensure maximum damage with little effort, and such is the Nukite tsuki fighting style. Although karate largely deals with closed fist attacks, owing to its affiliation with boxing, there are some open palm techniques aimed at the most vulnerable parts of the opponent's body, which could result in a fatal end. The Nukite tsuki requires the attacker to open their fists and launch themselves like an RPG in a straight thrust into the opponent's soft spots, especially the throat. To perform this technique, the attacker takes a semi-wide stance for balance and forces their way into being in close range with the opponent before delivering rapid thrusts into the vulnerable spots, hoping for a quick finish. While that is achievable, the International Mixed Martial Arts Federation does not believe that risking the opponent's health for a quick end to a fight is a worthy trade. Number 7. Otoshi uchi, the fatal elbow strike. Japanese karate is all about making the body into a weapon so deadly that it subdues or destroys an enemy completely, dealer's choice. However, one thing is certain, any elbow strike to any part of the body sends scorpions up anyone's head. The Otoshi uchi literally translates to dropping elbow, where the attacker takes a less wider stance and drops the elbow from a high position and lands it quickly and forcefully over their opponent's body. It is mostly aimed at the other joints or sometimes the base of the skull, which often leads to a concussion, and in rare cases, fatality isn't ruled out. The International Mixed Martial Arts Federation immediately ruled against keeping the technique, having seen its consequences on the training mats and real-life combat scenarios. For many who train to use the technique, they do so with heavily padded training gear to protect the skull and other vulnerable parts of the body that could result in fatal consequences. Number 6. Hiza geri, Knee to the groin. The Hiza geri is quite similar to the king geri, as both techniques enforce a brutal strike to the groin. However, with the Hiza geri, it is a completely different area part of the attacker's body that is lunged into the groin, unlike the kin geri where the feet are applied to the targeted area. The Hiza geri is a dangerous knee kick to the groin, and it was banned for obvious reasons. The move required more than mastery of the technique. It required brute force and a will to damage, hurt, and incapacitate an opponent. The attacker delivers a sharp upward kick, lunging the knee directly into the groin, which incapacitates the opponent immediately, especially when they're male. In traditional karate, the move was created as a self-defense technique to help a fighter target the most vulnerable point in their opponent's body. While it would have been fair if the impact were the same for both genders, it was a one-sided exchange, and fighting associations like the UFC and MMA did not find it fair, so they called time on it. While the move is absolutely deadly, it is just as simple as it only requires a knee to the groin area. However, to visualize the motion with a sparring partner, little details like the toes being kept pointed to avoid serious injuries to the attacker are exactly why karate should not be trivialized. Number 5. Yubi tori, a finger-grabbing menace. Yubi tori literally translates to grabbing a person's fingers. However, in karate, the technique is much more technical than that. While the technique is most definitely difficult to apply, as it requires a huge amount of training and precision, it hasn't stopped making waves in the media and in some dojos. However, while there is a strong possibility that you get away with it in a street fight or some brawl, it is completely forbidden in the professional standards, which include the UFC and the MMA. The Yubi tori is a joint-locking technique where the attacker manipulates joints in the opponent's arms by locking and gripping their fingers in a deadlock, sending pain through the locked arm, causing the opponent to writhe in pain. But it gets even darker. One wrong move or a forced twitch the wrong way could possibly lead to a dislocation or a lasting paralysis of the affected arm. Traditional dojos have always been averse to teaching it, except as a last resort. Number 4. Kotageshi, a damning wrist twist. The International Mixed Martial Arts Federation, or IMMAF, has continuously tried to review the rules of the mixed martial arts competition with focused deliberations on how to preserve the safety and integrity of the sport. Ergo, their obvious aversion to joint manipulating techniques like the Yubi tori. However, aside from the Yubi tori, the regulation body decided against keeping a joint-destroying move like the Kotageshi. The Kotageshi was originally designed as part of Aikido, since the fighting style involves grappling and immense violence. However, karate fighters soon inculcated this move into the curriculum, especially as MMA continued to evolve. The move requires the user to be more reactive than active, as it is mostly used as a self-defense technique. To use this move, when the opponent reaches for the attacker's hand, the latter steps away from the attack and counters by stepping behind him while using his free hand to grab the opponent's hand, in which he places his thumb between the ring and pinky finger before forcing it backwards and supporting it with their free arm to aid the push and force a broke hand or a quick surrender. Number 3. Mae tobi geri, a flying kick to the head. While it is a known fact that the skull is one of the most difficult bones to break on the body, the MMA and UFC take absolutely no risk of a kick to the head. Although in combat, when both contestants are going head-to-head, the competition allows the jumping front kick to the head or other parts of the body aside from the groin. The International Mixed Martial Arts Federation, or IMMAF, frowns on allowing the kick to the head on a grounded opponent. The Mae tobi geri is an extremely difficult art to perform as it requires serious physicality for impact and athleticism to help the attacker get his body off the ground. To perform the technique, the attacker jumps from the front knee raised to his chest point like a loaded gun, then jumps from the back leg to force the loaded front knee into an extended leg unleashed into the target area with power generated from the hip drive. During a match between Piotr Jan and Aljamain Sterling in 2021, Piotr forcefully planted his knee into Sterling's head while he was grounded, forcing a disqualification on Piotr and a declaration of Sterling as the champion. After all, rules are rules. While you could unleash the technique on a grounded opponent in a brawl, you most definitely can't get away with it in most combat sporting associations. Number 2. The classic headbutt. Karate reinforces the ideas of kicking and punching as the preferred choice or style of fighting. However, sometimes during a brawl, The fighters improvise when they notice an opening. A fight is a game of intelligence and opportunities after all. However, the MMA has strict rules about taking some kinds of opportunities. For some context, the classic headbutt, which has been a self-defense technique since time immemorial, is not allowed in the octagon. While it might be a natural self-defense technique to most, for a trained fighter, allowing them to lunge the crown of their head into the most vulnerable parts of another fighter is too dangerous, as injuries, fatal or even permanent, are inflicted on targeted areas like the eyes, the joints, the nose, the jaw, or the orbital sockets. It requires no special skill, so it can be performed by just about anyone if they can grab their opponent in close proximity and then send a battering ram into their facial area. During a UFC match between Chris Curtis and Nasruddin Imavov on June 10, 2023, Nasruddin sent a headbutt directly into Chris's face, leaving a severe cut above his right eye in the second round. Ergo, he could not continue, and the match was immediately ruled as a no contest, meaning there is neither a winner nor a loser. It was the perfect vindication of the MMA's fight against the headbutt technique, as it evolves a combat sport into an outright Viking warfare. Number 1. Kenota. The Kenota is the perfect fighting style for a fighter with a mentality to cause a fatal injury rather than subdue. The term literally translates to an eye poke or eye gouging attack. The move is absolutely crude and brutal, almost like the lovely combat sport is forced into a primitive way of survival. Elegance dies at its roots, and a raging primal instinct kicks in, forcing the fighter into a survival mode that completely shuts down the safety principles of the International Mixed Martial Arts Federation, or IMMAF, which is for the attacker to get his fingers pressed deeply into the eyes of the opponent, resulting in permanent blindness, or just any other injuries to the eyes, causing disorientation or sometimes forcing the opponent to yield the contest. For some context, the Mike Jackson-Dean fight in the UFC had to be immediately canceled when Dean was caught trying to gouge out Mike's eyes, giving Mike the win and earning Dean a penalty for flouting the rules. While the MMA is all for ending a fight in seconds, only certain attacks are allowed in the octagon. Do you think some of the banned techniques could be reviewed and brought back in for more blood-pumping action? On Martial Road, we follow those shadows. Remember to subscribe, like, share, and see where they lead.